American Indian nations and tribes and bands were democratic from the beginning of time. But the history of Native Americans and ballot access is far more often a story about suppression. Hey, it's season 2 of Breaking History. Mark Trahant here. Remember, if you like this content, take a second to share, subscribe, and we always like reading comments. At the time of the Constitution, voting was limited to white male property owners. In fact, the word democracy was seen as dangerous and infectious. As the franchise grew, more people demanded to have a say in the country's future. 14th Amendment recognized the right of Black Americans to vote. Native Americans were mostly excluded. When shall the red man be emancipated, wrote Gertrude Simons Bonin or Zitkala Sa in 1919. When shall the red man be deemed worthy of full citizenship, if not now? That came in 1924 with the American Indian Citizenship Act. But voting suppression continued. Each state continued to set its own rules, and shortly after the law was enacted, for example, the state of Alaska started requiring a literacy test. One way states kept Native Americans from voting was to say that because taxes were not collected, that should be a barrier. Another tactic was to deny the right of vote because of federal trust power, claiming that Native Americans were legally persons under guardianship. In 1948, the Arizona Supreme Court recognized the right of Native American people to vote. That same year, a federal panel in New Mexico held that the state constitution denying the franchise to, quote, Indians not taxed, violated the 14th and 15th Amendments. The last official barrier was removed in 1957 when Utah removed its laws denying the right to vote. The SAVE Act that President Trump has demanded would require proof of citizenship. And this is a good one. Tribal membership and identification by itself is not enough. First Americans need more proof.
If MAGA Republicans want to bog down the Senate over a debate on voter suppression, Democrats are ready. We're ready to be here all day, all night, as long as it takes to ensure the powers of voter suppression do not win the day. Let me be very clear. The SAVE Act is not a voter ID bill. It is in every sense a voter suppression bill. It could purge millions of American citizens from the voter rolls through a screening algorithm designed by Elon Musk's Doge Squad. It could disenfranchise over 20 million Americans.
Let me get personal for a minute. My wife, Jaynie Parrish, works on these issues every day. She organizes voters on the tribal lands of Navajo, Hopi, and White Mountain Apache. Jaynie, I want to start just by talking about how complicated it can be to vote. Maybe walk us through the process.
I'm here currently in Kayenta on the Navajo Nation, and just recently we were in the high school, and we were talking with soon-to-be first-time voters. And if you've ever seen our Arizona voter registration form, it looks simple, the paper form, but it can get really complicated if you don't know your physical address. And sometimes a lot of our first-time voters don't know what that means because we run on P.O. boxes up here on the res. And so trying to locate a physical address, which will mean drawing a map on the form, also giving a general location like half a mile off Route 12, next to the blue house, and a third thing to make sure, a third description that to make sure that the county understands where your home is the GPS coordinates. So sometimes the Google Plus code or an Apple Maps, that's just about the third or fourth question on the form. And it'll take time. And that doesn't even include turning in the form, which is either hand dropping it off at our county recorder office, which is 2+ hours away, or if they use the mail system, that can vary as well because our mail does not go directly to where it needs to go. Many folks on the Navajo Nation, their mail has to go to Albuquerque and then back to Phoenix and make its way around. So it's a very complicated process, and that's just the paper form. So there's other processes and other strategies folks can use.
I know even after all of that, voting itself is not simple. And we saw in Apache County, one of the real unfortunate episodes in the last election. Maybe talk about what it's like to be a voter in Apache County when your next door neighbor may be in Navajo County.
Yes, recently, actually, as of yesterday, I believe, the Apache County Board of Supervisors just met for a presentation about vote centers. Vote centers is what we have here in Navajo County and is what we have in our neighboring county in Coconino. And what that means essentially is it makes voting easier for voters in their county, that they don't have to do precinct polling location voting, meaning you have to go to your one site. Instead, if you have vote centers throughout the county, no matter where you are in the county, you can cast your vote. So if you live in and work in one area versus traveling to another area for work or your home, and you can't make it in time on election day, and you prefer to vote in person, these vote centers can be really handy and an easier way for people to vote. In Apache County, you had precinct voting locations. And what that meant in the 24 presidential election, the county election office had a lot of election day failures, unfortunately. We saw 9 polling locations went down. We saw printing machines not working. There was issues, questions about whether or not testing happened prior. Some locations weren't open on time. Some were closing earlier. It was just kind of a mess in some of the locations. And this is really unfortunate when you're talking about weather conditions. When it's cold, people waiting 3 or more hours in the snow, standing, there's nowhere to sit. And so people have to be outside. And you can think about the elders and those that can't sit or stand for a long time. So due to a lot of these election day failures, the Navajo Nation did sue to try to keep the polling locations open an additional 3 hours, which did happen.
The Navajo Nation's Department of Justice filing suit to extend polling hours to 9:30 tonight. Information on this is limited right now. Officials are saying it's due to broken ballot machines from this morning. We'll bring you an update as soon as we know more.
But by that point, a lot of voters got tired of waiting. Some were already turned away, and it was just very complicated on election day in Apache County. Now, there's an argument to be made from voters themselves and organizations who work on voting rights that if Apache County can also move to vote centers like Navajo and Coconino, voters would have more of a choice in the matter of where they want to vote. And I can think of a good friend of mine who works right now in Window Rock, and they actually live in Wide Ruins, which is another part of the county, which is very far drive, more than an hour and a half. And he has to rush over there on election day to cast his vote instead of staying right where he is in Window Rock to cast his vote. So that's kind of the difference in what we're looking at. And we hope that the Apache County Board of Supervisors will consider that move.
I want to get to the big picture and how the country just keeps pushing, and particularly the Republicans keep pushing these really stringent voting measures. Every one of those affects you and people you know every election. How do you counter that?
With a lot of faith and hope and a lot of persistence. But to be honest, it's really the people that work on this day to day, organizers that are part of my team, as well as partners and in partnership, I should say, with the county election offices and the recorder's offices, because our county offices are already underfunded and understaffed as it is. And they're expected to reach thousands of voters, notifying them, keeping them updated. And sometimes that's just not possible. So groups like ours, Arizona Native Vote, we have about 5 organizers who do this on a regular basis, calling voters, helping them through the process one by one. And really, it's labor intensive. And that is the only way that we've been able to really show impact through data, through effectiveness, is really field grassroots organizing. And so I think that that type of persistence, and we're very lucky to have people that really care about voting rights. They're really passionate, and they've been working on this for decades. Before I ever got involved, before we even had our organization, Arizona Native Vote. I mean, our grandmas, our aunties, our uncles and grandpas that have been fighting for voting rights for generations, they are behind this work, and they're making sure when they can and wherever they can that our vote matters. You know, the data that Native voters are critically important to every election. And so we've seen time and time again many ways that our vote is trying to be suppressed.
Let me ask you about vote by mail, since that seems to be another issue that's been contentious with Republicans.
When it comes to voting by mail in Arizona, it's very, very popular.
In Arizona, voting often starts long before Election Day. ballots filled out at kitchen tables, envelopes sealed and signed, then dropped in the mail or a ballot box.
It's a system that was created by a Republican legislature and governor, been highly promoted by folks from all political parties, and voters really like it.
But the issue has become increasingly political. Right now, the FBI is investigating matters tied to the 2020 election in Maricopa County. Arizona is also locked in a legal battle with the Justice Department over voter information. And at the federal level, the president and other Republican lawmakers continue to criticize mail-in voting.
It's very interesting to hear some of the opposition coming from Republicans, particularly if you just look at the last election in 2024. Republicans increased their majority in the state Senate, in the state House, and they won the presidency with 81% of Arizonans voting by mail.
How important is that in Arizona?
Very important. 63% of our voters in our region up here on Navajo Nation, including Hopi as well as White Mountain Apache tribes, 63% of us vote by mail. And so the complications that we're seeing now, even not just with this current policy and proposed legislation, but for years, I talked about the challenges already with our U.S. postal system, and as well as putting more barriers into the way voting by mail is already done. It's already complicated enough. I'll give you an example. In the 24 elections, there's a period in the voting process after Election Day, what we call ballot curing. And what that means is voters who vote by mail, they send in their ballot either at the drop box or they mail it in or they drop it off on Election Day. If there is something wrong with the signature, if it's missing or the county cannot identify the signature or it's different from their records, they have to verify that signature because there was fear in previous years about voter fraud, which is not happening, but it was a new law in place several years ago. And so what happens now, for example, in 24, we got a list initially of 500 people that needed to cure their ballots predominantly in Apache County, some in Navajo County, and some in Coconino County on tribal lands. We know that because we know the addresses and where the voters are from. That list grew as the days went forward, and you only have 5 days after the election day to cure a ballot, meaning you have to find the voter, contact the voter. They then have to call the county election office, answer questions to verify that's their ballot in order for their vote to count. And for my story, I had 5 people on my list in my hometown of Kayenta. All I had was their name, Kayenta, and the zip code. And I had to go ask my dad, my family, do you know these people? Where are they? And this was Friday. It took me up to 24 to 48 hours to find one voter and where he lived. And finally, we got to him and we got to cure his ballot 30 minutes before the 5 p.m. deadline on Sunday. And you can imagine the complications where a lot of folks will go into the border towns, into town to do their shopping. So some of them aren't home. Some of them only speak in Navajo. Some of them live an hour and a half away by dirt road. I mean, there's just so many things that has gone wrong. And so out of that 800 so list, only 24 ballots were cured. So this is infuriating, not only with the election day failures where people were turned away, but those ballots that weren't able to be cured. And here's another statistic. We measured 3,000 plus provisional ballots on tribal lands here on Navajo predominantly. Voters were rejected. Their vote got rejected. That should not be happening. That is the most we've ever seen of provisional ballots being rejected in our region. Now, and then to put it in another way, if these 3,000 plus voters were counted, it would have been a voter turnout increase on tribal lands. Let me say that again. It would have been a voter turnout increase on tribal lands in the 2024 election. So this is what we're up against in the midterms, and we're doing our best to try to not only reach those voters, but others so that we can prepare and hopefully this does not happen again.
Well, and this will be the last question. Your basic premise is that everybody should vote and their vote should count. And that's just not what is agreed on in our political discourse right now.
Unfortunately, that is how it is. It's putting so much of the burden on the voter to do the job, and it shouldn't have to be that way. But we're up against so much. Every year, a state legislature introduces new bills to make it harder, make it more complicated. So voters don't. They might get frustrated with the process. They may have a clerical error in their paperwork or something happens and they just give up or they don't have trust in the system. And what we're trying to say is keep fighting, keep showing up, keep voting, stay in lines, get your ballot there early, prepare as much in advance. So our team is very much on the side of preparation because we as individual voters, that is the power we have. We may not have the immediate power to change the laws and policies overnight. We can still get in touch with the leaders and do what we need to. But me as an individual voter, I can make sure my paperwork is in. I can make sure I know what my checklist is. I can make sure that I'm prepared as much as I can be. And that's what we're trying to tell our fellow community members.
Well, keep fighting, and thank you, Jaynie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jaynie, and thanks for watching. Please remember to comment, share, and subscribe. I'm Mark Trahant. Until next week, this is Breaking History.